Hello all, good afternoon, welcome, and thank you for joining today's session. My name is Thomas Munk of Rosenfeld, and I work in the Adobe's Customer Success Manager group. We focus on helping you, our customers, get as much value as possible from your Adobe solution. Today, we are hosting the third part of the Adobe Analytics webinar series, Analytics Thursdays. We will be looking at segmentation and derived metrics. This is a live webinar. It's in a listen-only format, but is very much intended to be interactive. Please type your questions into the chat pod at the side of the screen at any time. The team will address questions both during the webinar as well as save time towards the end of the session for the questions that we don't get to during the session. Just to note that this session is being recorded, and the link to the recording will be sent out to everyone who registered, along with a link to recordings of previous sessions in this series. We will also have a closing poll at the end to get feedback on the usefulness of this session, as well as any suggestions you may have for future webinars. Our presenter today is the one and only Eric Matisoff, Analytics Evangelist at Adobe. And now, to get things started, let me hand you over to the speaker. Eric, take us away.
Great. Thank you, Thomas. Really excited to be here today on this lovely Analytics Thursday. Looks like we've got a really great group of folks joining from all over the region, so thanks for joining. I've got a lot of really good content for you, and rather than waste time talking about all the cool people we have joining, let's jump in. The way that I've organized this session is I'm going to be walking you through just some basic slides that do some reminders of where we are when it comes to calculated and derived metrics and where we are within terms of segmentation. I'm actually going to go through them relatively quickly because I really want to get to the meat of the session today, which is always my personal favorite, which is actually getting into the product and showing you some different features that we've added recently, as well as just kind of a quick overview of how things are organized and how we hope our customers like yourselves are organized as well. And so with that, let's actually get going. So like we said, the big focus today is to take control of analytics with calculated metrics and segmentation. So we're going to start in that order. We're going to start with calculated metrics. And so when we talk about metrics, the movie that always comes to mind for me is Moneyball, where if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. Also a really great book as well, where a baseball team here in the U.S. in Oakland, the Oakland A's, ended up using new set of metrics in order to define how they should select players to join their team. And it incredibly changed the entire game and the entire way that that recruiting was done for teams. And so that's the focus today. Is very similarly, we want to make sure that you are aware of all the different types of metrics that can be created, how they're created, and how they can be used. So we're going to start just simply by standardizing metrics and segments. So let's jump in there. So if you're familiar with this old version of Adobe Analytics and Reports and Analytics, you may remember that you used to have to hit Add Metrics, and then you would have a pop-up window. You'd have to do a search for your metric, and then it wouldn't be there. You'd actually have to switch on over to Calculated Metrics, find the one you're looking for, or create a new one, and it was kind of a clunky interface. And now we have this beautiful new interface that is interactive and drag and drop and much easier to use. And that's what I'm going to be walking you through today, all the different features that are built into this tool. Speaking of those features, here's a list of all the different recent features that we have within the past couple of years that are tied to calculated metrics. And I'm going to be walking through almost all of these. And some that I want to call out is, obviously, I'm going to be focusing on the new builder. I'm going to be focusing on the ability to segment metrics, the ability to understand metric polarity and get a feel for what the metric preview is, and how we should be leveraging descriptions and what different kind of functions are in there, etc. So when it comes to descriptions, which was one that I mentioned earlier, we have some recommendations. And so these are some really simple recommendations that for those of you that are creating metrics and sharing them, I highly, highly recommend taking advantage of the descriptor field, the description field within calculated metrics. And so when you do that, there's 2, maybe 3 things you always want to include when defining a global calculated metric. And so they're pointed out here in red. One is show what it does. Explain, more so in a friendly way what the actual calculated metric is. For example, for orders per visit, it's used to show efficiency of the site and converting people. Super simple, but it's much more explanatory than just simply saying orders per visit. And then the second suggestion that we have is show where to use it. So orders per visit is a pretty standard metric, so you can use that globally or when looking at individual content and flows. So giving some context for how that calculated metric can be used. And then the third recommendation for descriptions is optional. It depends. And so this is one where maybe you want to show where not to use it. So you show what it does, you show where to use it, and you show perhaps where not to use it. And so this is one where this metric doesn't really make sense to use it completely site-wide. Generally, you want to break this type of a metric down by pages or by site sections, etc. Maybe by page type. So just some recommendations there. We also, within the toolset, have the ability to approve and share calculated metrics. Now, this is going to be based on your access within Adobe Analytics. For those of you that do have access to approve calculated metrics, we have a recommendation. You can see here that you have the ability to essentially say these 3 metrics were, they came down and from the administrators of Adobe Analytics, and they're approved, and they are the company approved way of defining these types of metrics. And so first of all, within our component selector here, you can see we have a little filter that limits to just approvals. You'll see that same filter also exists within Analysis Workspace, so you can very quickly access the calculated metrics that have been deemed completely worthy and completely 100% correct in terms of the way that they're defined. Now, the recommendation that we have for approved metrics and, by the way, globally shared metrics is, again, use that description field. That is there to share information the same way you have the ability to share metrics. Also, we have the ability to do some tagging. And so tagging is something that we've seen used in all sorts of different ways. And one of the ways that we've seen is to tag calculated metrics by team. For example, oh, I thought I had a screenshot. I don't. You can tag, based on marketing, or you can tag the marketing team. Maybe these metrics or these segments are especially valuable for marketers. And these other metrics or segments are specifically valuable for operations or for the advertising team or the editorial team, for the product team, etc. Really simple way to organize all the different metrics and segments that are flying around within your company. So let me move on from there. Next step is you can also create new metrics without actually changing code on the page or making changes in DTM or changes to the JavaScript. And so we have some recommendations here. Maybe you want to create a new metric that is the mobile first-time visitor searches. And so how would we do that? First of all, we would just simply drag in unique visitors, and don't worry, we'll be walking through this within the demo as well. But we drag in unique visitors, and then we can also pull in a segment as well. So we can say, okay, the focus is on search results page. So we drag that in. We also have the ability to stack segments within calculated metrics as well, just like we do within the tool. So we can also say visits from mobile devices is another segment. And then we also want to segment using first-time visits. And now we're able to see a little preview in the top right that shows us over time how that metric works. And you'll notice First of all, that metric is not only going to be available within the tool that you're creating it, but we've pushed it everywhere. You can see it also within Report Builder, for example. You'll see it within Ad Hoc Analysis, Reports and Analytics, and of course, my favorite, Analysis Workspace. But one thing to keep in mind is that you may notice there's actually a dip, a very significant dip during about a few weeks or maybe a month's worth of time for this calculated metric. And so what we can do is actually edit the segment so that it says page equals search results or page equals searches, because maybe for some reason you can see again we're taking advantage of the description for this segment. We're saying that this, for a small period of time, the page was misnamed, and then that will actually fill in the broken metric that we were looking at earlier. Now, there's a warning here in that the segments that you're changing, if you're using them within calculated metrics, that's going to affect the metrics that you're actually creating. So it's just something to be aware of, is that since they're linked, obviously, if you make a change to the segment, it's also going to make a change to the metric that's taking advantage of those segments. So the advice here from an implementation standpoint is before you go and use more events, like granted, yes, we have 1,000 different events. That's a ton of different events that you can use for all sorts of granular items. But we also want you to be creative and take advantage of the ability to use segments and apply them to metrics. So you don't need an event for both, for all different things. You can take advantage of hit-based segments, for example, to replace the need for events. So let's see. So what do we have here? We've got the good side, we've got the dark side, and we've got the light side. And so hopefully we've got a lot of Star Wars fans out there. And I couldn't think of a better example of segmentation. Segments are something that we always want to be thinking about when we are doing our analysis. If we're looking at just overall site-wide views, 100% of our visitors, it's very difficult to really make actionable decisions and do proper analysis. And so breaking things out by the dark side or the light side, maybe purchasers or non-purchasers, or registered users and non-registered users. All these simple different ways to break out data are really important when you're doing your analysis. And so again, I want to jump into the demo shortly, so I'm just going to walk through a couple slides so that we can head on in and I can give you some really cool tips. So in terms of segments, again, I highly recommend using them everywhere. And here's just that standard, stock photo that we're required to use in every presentation. And it's basically pointing out the fact that you have different sets of users and they behave in different ways. And so you can break them out by, the type of customer they are, leveraging customer attributes or classifications. You can break them out by referral types or campaign information or marketing channels. You can break them out based on behavior on the site. Have they been to page X? Or have they visited page Y several times? All of these different ways of breaking out your users will help bubble up insights that you can not only learn from, but also take action from. And I'll be giving you some ideas for ways to do that. Here's that smattering of different segment-based features that have been released over the past few years as well. And so we have the ability, and I'll be walking through the ability to break down segments that are focused on the hit or focused on the visit or the visitor. We've also built in a validation chart that shows you, is there actually any data within this segment that you've created? We really have blown out the capabilities that are aligned with sequential segmentation as well, so that you can not only say, this happened, then that happened, and focus my segment there, but you can also filter to just what happened before that sequence was followed or after that sequence was followed. And you can also filter that sequence by it happened after X happened, or within a number of days, or a number of hits, or a number of page views, a number of visits. Lots of power there. You also have the ability to exclude a segment. So say, you know what, users that haven't purchased, users that haven't registered, or haven't been to a specific sequence that you've defined. We've also applied very similar tagging and approval concepts to help you organize as well. You can apply multiple segments to a table within Analysis Workspace. And of course, we want you to be able to share them very simply across the different tool sets that you have at your fingertips, as well as across the different report suites that you're working in. And you also have the ability to drag and drop definitions into a new segment so that you can copy them there. And then, of course, if you're leveraging multiple tools within the Adobe Experience Cloud, you have the ability to make segments a Marketing Cloud audience as well, so that you can take advantage of them in Audience Manager or Adobe Target or Adobe Campaign, etc. So this is what the most recent version of the Segment Builder looks like. It's drag and drop interface, much more friendly than the old version. Hopefully you've already played around with it, and I'll be walking you through it very shortly. And then in terms of the manager, we've got lots of capabilities, as I mentioned earlier, to add new segments here in the component manager, to manage them, to approve them, copy them, delete them, tag them, etc. So with that, I don't want to spend any more time on slides. Let's get into the demo. I'm going to switch on over to my browser here, share my screen, and walk you through some of this fun stuff that I've got in store for you. So if you give me 1 second to hit share, now what you should be seeing is a very simple looking Analysis Workspace project that I've defined. So the first thing that I'm going to do is actually walk you through very simply the Calculated Metric Manager. So the Calculated Metric Manager is listed within Components. So if you simply click Components and then head on down to Calculated Metrics, then you'll see a list of all the calculated metrics that you have access to. So these will include calculated metrics that you've created, as well as those that have been shared to you. And you've got lots of fun different options in terms of accessing them. So first of all, in the left panel, you'll have the ability to filter them based on tags. So I was talking earlier about the concept of filtering based on different teams. So maybe the operations team can view some, or the editors can view others. You can filter by marketing, etc. So lots of different ways to access the different calculated metrics that you have. You can filter them by report suite or who the owner is. We've got some other filters here that you'll see within the workspace set as well. So you can say show all, or just mine, or those that have been approved as well. So lots of different options in terms of accessing them. So what can you do once you're here in the component manager? If you select one, you have the ability to just simply tag it or share it. And sharing is going to be nice and friendly. You can share it to different groups or different users within your organization so that they have access to it as well. You'll see who it's been shared with. Is it shared with all or just a few people? You can also delete them, rename them, approve them. I was talking about approvals earlier. You can make a copy of it so that you can then copy it and maybe tweak it yourself if you need to. Lots of different features in terms of the component builder. So that's the component manager for calculated metrics. Let's actually head on over into some examples. So what I want to actually show you is that we've actually got calculated metrics that exist within the tool, and you may not have already noticed that they exist. And so one place that they exist, that we've just simply built it right into the tool, is within compare time periods within the tool set. So if you were to just simply right click, which of course if you've been on any of my other webinars, you know I love to right click. If you right click on any metric when you're looking at a dimension here on the left and go to compare time periods, you've got some options in terms of comparing that metric to a previous time period as well. So what I've done is I just went ahead and I clicked compare to previous week, and so now what we've done automatically for you is we've created a time range that says instead of looking at the 2nd to the 8th, I'm looking at the 25th to the 1st. Applied that to my metric, and in the right column we also added this percent change. Now the percent change is exactly what it sounds like. It's a calculated metric. And like any other calculated metric, you can click the info button to learn a little bit about how we actually defined it. And so you can see we created just a target date range that is a segment of our occurrences metric that we started with, and then a compare date range, which is this date range here, and then we're dividing that by the compare date range of the occurrences. So very, very simple calculated metric that we created on the fly for you. And of course, you can not only see the info about it, you can see it trended over time, or you could even edit it if you needed to. So you could really dig in here and get some granularity and dig into each of the different segments, how it's defined, edit it, save it as something else, and really get into a good feel for it. And this is that interface that I showed in a screenshot just a little bit earlier. So like I said, we've built in calculated metrics into the tool for you automatically. Here's another one that you may be used to seeing is bounce rate. Bounce rate is something that you'll automatically have access to within the tool to understand what the bounce rate is on your site. But let's get into let's get into and create some of our own calculated metrics here. And where we do that is by clicking Components and then heading on into New Metric. Very, very simple place to do it. So when I do that, I go ahead and click Components, New Metric, and that slides up our calculated metric builder. So from here, I'm able to access a very similar screen that has my metrics and segments. And what's this on the left here? We've got some really powerful functions that are available within our calculated metric builder. So let's keep it simple. Let's create maybe the most simple calculated metric ever, and that's just page views per visit. And so we do that just simply by dragging and dropping. Now, of course, within our component filter here, we can filter to approved metrics, favorites, metrics, segments, functions, etc. We've got all our different tags as well. So lots of different simple ways to find what we're looking for. We can also head on over to metrics and just scroll on down through all the different metrics that we have, and we've got tons of them. So that's a very simple way that you can take a look at our calculated metric builder. It looks like we're getting a funky little red bar. That's always fun. That's weird. It switched on over to orders. Maybe let's make it page views per order. So I've got the metric we were talking about. And so here we've got page views per visit. And so what are we looking at? As soon as I drag in those metrics, in the top right, we're going to see a preview of that metric trended over time. And you can see we've got that dip that we were talking about earlier. And for this particular website, not only did we miss out on this data for page views and visits, but we actually lost tracking completely during that time frame. So we don't really have an option to use segments to resolve that issue. But if it was just simply the example that we had in the slides, that would certainly be something easy to do. So what else do we have within the interface here? Obviously, we have a title, and this is going to be my very simple page views per visit title. We can give it a friendly description. This is optional. Again, we highly recommend putting in that information I was talking about earlier of what it is, where to use it, and perhaps where not to use it. Moving right along, we've got some format options. So very simply, we've got decimal, time, percent, and currency. Very, very simple concepts in terms of the format. You've got decimal places, which you may have seen I clicked on earlier, and that's just going to adjust how many decimal points do we include when we're showing this metric on in the different reports. We also have the option to say show upward trend as good or bad. So upward for page views per visit, normally that's going to be good news, but maybe if we're creating a different metric that is bounce rate or something similar to bounce rate, then upward is actually bad. So we want that to show as red within the interface. Of course, I love tagging. So here's one. We're going to apply it to engagement, and we're also going to apply it to, let's see, traffic, and the marketers are really going to be interested in this metric. So all these different tags just allow for some simplicity around and organization as well. As we move along here, we can get into our definition box. And this is our canvas for creating our different metrics. And so there's a few things that I want to call out here. First of all, now that I've dragged some metrics in, you'll see we've got some options. The very, very simplest one is, well, I've got two different metrics here. What's the operator that I'm going to use to define them? I've got, by default, we're always going to show divisor, but you've got plus, minus, and times, and divisible by as well. So lots of very simple different functions and operators that you can use to distinguish your metric. Now, of course, we've got a heck of a lot more than that. First of all, we've got this add button here. And this add button allows us to create segments and apply segments to our metrics, functions just like we have here on the left, segments just here on the left as well. We can add a different container or even a static number. So maybe we want to, for some reason, we want to apply 1.2 to our visits here, and we've got the ability to do that also. So now we've got a slightly higher page views per visit than we were looking at earlier when it was just times 0.1. You can see 3.622 down to 3.018. So lots of very simple things there within our ad. And I'll get into these other items in just a second. Some other items that you'll notice is we've got a gear for our metrics here. And so this is one that I may have mentioned in one of our previous webinars, is the ability to apply allocation to the different metrics that you drag in. And so this is really, really powerful feature. And by default, the allocation is going to be default. So that's going to be whatever the standard definition and allocation is for these metrics. But we give you a whole lot of different options. Linear is, of course, an important one. Linear is going to be, you're basically applying the full or a split value for each of the different values within the eval report that you're pulling it in. So if you've got maybe one page view and you've got an eval report that you've got 5 different values for, each one is going to get 0.2, so 1/5 of that page view. Visit participation is another really powerful one that I like to think of as sort of an attribution feature, in that every value gets full credit when it participated in the eval or within that metric. So for example, if we, in that same example where we have 5 different evals values, and we've got this visit participation enabled for this metric for a single page view, each value within that eval would get full credit because they all participated in it. And we've got a heck of a lot more in here. We've got some really good documentation in the knowledge base that describes each of these so that I don't have to go through each one. For right now, I'm just going to leave it as default, but it's really important to know that each of those exists. And it can do a really great job of defining how you can take advantage of your calculated metrics. So let's jump into some examples. So here's one that I've talked about before, and it's content velocity. Now if we look at it, it looks the same. It's page views divided by visits. But if we hit edit, what you'll see is that we've actually applied visit participation to our page views metric, so that we can see not only page views per visit, but we can see the content velocity downstream that those eval values are actually driving. So a very powerful way to better understand what pages are driving additional content downstream. So really, really cool. Again, that's one where we want good is green and is upwards. We've got some decimal places here, etc. Let's take a look at some other functions here. So one function that I've created, and this is a very, very simple one, is just a row count. And so you can see there's actually no options. To create this, all I did was I looked through my functions, and you can see there's a ton of them. We could probably spend about 3 hours going through all these different functions. Unfortunately, we only have 29 minutes left, and I'm trying to speak quickly for you so that you can get as much out of our time. But we also have some really good recommendations for use of these functions within the knowledge base as well. And so here's one that's just simply row count. And so when I drag that in, you'll see I'm going to hit cancel on it because we already defined it. You can see this number here, 153, is going to align perfectly with the total number of pages, 153, within my table. And that can be useful when creating other calculated metrics based on your total number of rows within your table as well. Maybe you're saying you want to see, I don't know, the number of page views divided by the total number of pages accessed within your time frame. And so that's something that you have access to within your row count. What else do we have? We also have a function called percentile. Now, for those of you that are like me and have some kids at home, I've got as of today, he's 8 weeks and a day. So something that's really important when I go to the doctor is they say, oh, he's in the 95th percentile in terms of height. I have no idea what that means. Maybe he's just an inch taller than the average and therefore he's in the 95th percentile. But it also can apply to your analytics metrics here as well. And so here's one that I've dragged in super simply. I pulled in percentile and it automatically populated these different sections. So my metric is visits, and I want to focus only on the top top percentile of my metric. So this is my 1%, the 1%ers within my in terms of visits. Now you'll see if I were to bring that down, maybe the top 90, then that's going to adjust and go down in terms of my visitation capabilities. In terms of how I created that, again, I just took percentile, dragged and dropped it. I pulled in my metric of visits. I applied a value to say the 99th percentile of my visits, and I've got the data I need. Now, that's not super interesting in a column of its own, but like row count, when you use it in a different metric and you apply some other items to it, so now we're seeing some really cool stuff. So we can say if visits is greater than, actually this is not the one that I thought it would be. Here we go, 80th percentile for bounce rate. So here we say if the visits is greater than the 80th percentile of visits, then I want to show the bounce rate. So that's a really powerful way to say only look at the bounce rate for the top top 20% of visits based on percentile. Otherwise, show 0. And so now, if we sort by it, we can see some pretty cool stuff in terms of the pages that are in my top percentile. And sorry, this is taking a second here to load. I think my Wi-Fi is getting excited because I'm presenting as well as showing lots of powerful data here. There we go. So now we can see these are the top 80% in terms of visits, page views in terms of my top percentile, 80th percentile and above, and focusing on the bounce rate of those. So really powerful way to do that. And so I'm going to drill in just a little further to show you what that looks like. And it may look a little daunting, and this may be one of those that your administrators creates and then approves so that you know you've got the data that you need. Now, what did I do here? This is a crazy looking metric. And the good news is that this actually is listed in our knowledge base as well. If you search for derived metrics or search for filtered bounce rate, etc., you'll find some good stuff in there. And so what I've done is I dragged in the if function. And so that exists just simply, if I can find it, maybe I'll do a search for if. There we go, it's an advanced function. And you can see when you click the info button, you've got a logical test. And so the logical test is this container here where I'm saying if, and then I pulled in the greater than. So I'm going even crazier. So I'm saying if visits is greater than the 80th percentile of visits, then I'm saying value if true, show the bounce rate. Otherwise, show 0. So really crazy looking definition. And I think I've got time to delete it and start. So I'm going to say drag in my if statement. Then I'm going to drag in my greater than into my logical test. And then I'm going to drag in my visits as a metric. So if visits, oops, I dragged in, what did I drag in? A visits per order. Drag in visits is greater than, and I'm going to say percentile, and we already looked at this earlier, so percentile is my visits 80% percentile. So then I'm saying if visits is greater than the 80th percentile of visits, then show my bounce rate. Otherwise, show a static number of 0. And that is a super quick way in which I define my metric. So that is just a taste of some of the power that comes with calculated metrics. I want to switch on over to segmentation because I can't wait to talk about the dark side and the light side within Star Wars. So let me dig in a little further. So just like the calculated metric manager, we also have a segment manager within components. It's here, components and segment. I'm not going to spend as much time drilling into it as I did for calculated metrics because really the concepts are the same. You've got your tags, you've got the ability to approve, rename, tag, share, blah, 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 blah. Let's jump into creating some segments. And so within segments, that's another one that automatically within the tool, we're leveraging segmentation for you and you may not even know it. So if I were to right click, for example, on this flow report and go to either create segment for this path, that's an obvious one, or trend, you'll see that when we trend that and maybe take a look at our data source, and you can see exactly what we're doing. We're looking at occurrences. We're actually defining a sequential based segment where we're saying page equals search results, and then the page equals gear, and then there isn't necessarily another page afterwards. So we're automatically using segmentation for you, and you may not have already known it. Same thing here when you trend a touch point within a fallout. Same exact concept. We're defining a segment automatically for you that says page equals search results, home, and then store locator. So we're already doing some segmentation for you, and you may not have already known that. Same thing with histogram here. If you were to do a show data source of your histogram, check out all this crazy stuff. We're doing lots of segmentation for you in order to populate that histogram we were looking at earlier. So just some ideas that you have where you're already using segmentation, and it may be a shortcut to you to create some sequential segments based on fallout that maybe you just want to simplify how you create it. You create your fallout first, and then you say, okay, this is actually the segment I was looking for. You can hit edit, and then maybe you hit save and save as, and you can edit it from there. So let's dig into some very simple segments that I've created. And so the first are maybe the most simple you have. And here you can see we've got multiple metrics and multiple segments applied to them. And I can drag them in and drop them in as necessary. I can say my country is United States here, and I can apply that additional segment to my bounce rate. Same thing with page views. Now when I create one, I can go to Components and New Segment. And that will pop up my segment builder that we were looking at earlier. So very similarly, we've got title, we've got description, we've got tags, and the difference is going to be our canvas. And that difference is really important when you look at the drop down that I have here. What is our segment going to be focused on? Is it limited to a hit, limited to the visit, or limited to the visitor? And as I drag in a dimension, a metric, or a segment to my segment builder, you'll see that the preview up in the top is going to change based on what I select. So if I select, let's look at just a simple one, search results, then you can see my bullseye here is going to show me the number of unique visitors, visits, and page views that align to this particular segment as I've defined it. So really, really important and simple way to get a feel and a pulse on this segment that you're creating. And now when you drag in a second dimension or metric or segment, now you're going to see we've got an operator. And here we've got an and or an or. So we can say page equals search results, or it equals search results, no results. And so we can say or. And now we've got some data to take a look at. Now let's see. So what if we were to actually switch these up? We can just simply drag and drop. And now we can see we've got page equals no results or page equals search results. And what I want to do is I want to say then. I want to see the users, unfortunately we don't have anything, where users are going from no results, then they're going to search results. Now this is within a hit. Maybe I want to switch to a visitor, where a visitor, or within a visit, a user is going from search results, no results, then they're probably doing a search, and then going to search results. Really, really simple, yet powerful example of a sequential segment. So you can say no results search to search results. Search, if we can spell correctly. And so this is a really simple sequential segment that you can use every day when you're doing some analysis based on your keywords. Now, what if you were to take a look at maybe this icon here? So when you do a sequential segment, you've got this ability to limit to everyone who has performed this segment, or maybe just the sequence that happened before, or the behavior that happened before this segment was completed, or the behavior that happened after this segment was completed. So maybe we want to do what happened before, and then we could apply this segment to maybe our internal search keywords report. So we can see what the search keywords were that resulted in no results, and then ended up maybe getting a second search for search results. So really easy way to apply some additional analysis. Or maybe for these users, maybe you know what we could do is we could switch this on over to no results. So this is where users are getting no results, and then they're doing another search and getting the search results, no results again. We want to see if those users are getting frustrated. So focus on the sequence after this happens. Are they bouncing? Are they exiting the site, clicking an exit site? Are they switching to a different product finding method? Something like that. Lots of different capabilities in terms of your options there. Now, we also have, of course, have the ability to apply additional segments to our segment. And when we drag that in, it's going to pull in the definition of the segment that we're looking at here as well. That way we can say, okay, now we're saying it's a mobile device equals mobile or tablet, then this happens, then that happens. Lots of different capabilities in terms of defining your segments. So let's keep digging in a little further. So something else that you have within segments and within Analysis Workspace is the ability to stack segments. So I've created two different segments here. Let's take a look at them. The first is never purchased. And so I defined this really, maybe a little backwards. I said never purchased for the visitor. The visitor is saying, once this loads up in a second, sorry about my Wi-Fi deficiencies here, but what I've defined is I first created a segment where I say revenue is greater than 0. And so what I did is I actually applied an exclude filter. So there's include now, and that turns it gray. So now this is saying where revenue is greater than 0, that means they did purchase. And then maybe I want to exclude that particular segment. And now I'm focused on visitors that have never purchased before. So that's a really, again, powerful way. And you'll see that I'm limiting to visitors here rather than visit or hit. And so a simple way to do that. Of course, we could click this drop down and we could say equals 0. That's another way to do it. And switch on back to include. There's many different ways to, as we say here in the US, to skin the cat. So I'm going to cancel out of that. We also have a sequential segment here. When I click the info button, we can see we've got a sequential segment, and we've got something cool that I've added in here. And so this sequential segment, I wanted to focus on not only where the entry page equals home, but I also wanted to say the exit page equals men, and I wanted to say that happens within a single hit. So that means there's no custom links, exit links, download links, or page views that occurs in between the entry page of home and the exit page of men. And so that's a really powerful way to do that. So what I've done is when you create a sequential segment, so you switch on over to then you have the ability to click this little watch or clock here. You can say within 1 week is going to be the default, but you can say within a page view. And so that's slightly different than what we were looking at earlier. That allows for custom exit or download links to fire in between the entry page and the exit page. But I don't want that. I want to say within the very next hit, entry page is home, exit page is men. That's what I want to focus on. I know that that's a problem area. And so we can dig into that if we need to. You'll notice that you've got lots of different other dimensions that you can say here too. So you can say within, let's see, a page type, or within last touch channel, referring domain, etc. What else can we do? We can also say after. So we can say entry page equals home, but after 1 week, or after one page view, or after one, I don't know, let's say 1 minute. So we can say a minute passes in between these. That means the user spent a minute on the home page, and then within one hit, they exited from the men page. Really, really powerful capabilities here in terms of what you can do within sequential segmentation. I'm going to hit cancel there so we can go back on over to my stacked segment idea. So now we're looking at unique visitors. We've got never purchased and that crazy sequential segment we just dug into thoroughly. And now I want to see users that have never purchased and did that sequence. And so I stacked those one on top of the other. And I did that very, very simply. And so if I go on back here, we go to my segments, and I'm going to say never purchased. I can drag that one on in here. And then I can say enters on home, then exits on the men page. And you'll see, depending on where I drag that, if I drag it on top, that will stack it. If I drag it below, that will stack it. If I drag it right on top, that'll actually replace it. If I drag it to the left or the right, that will actually add it as an additional segment. So I want to stack it, so I'm going to put it right underneath. And then just like we were looking at earlier, now I've got my stacked segment of never purchased, and it enters on home page, then exits on the men page. So really, really useful stuff that you've got here. And the capabilities of stacked segments is powerful because you can actually save on the number of segments you can create. You know, prior to stacked segments, I'd have to create never purchased and then enters on home page, and then I'd create a third segment that combines them. Instead, now I can just drag and drop. Now we already walked through this concept of sequential segments from one to the next, then prior to and after, and it doesn't necessarily make sense to look at that from a last touch channel perspective, but let's dig into this slightly for these product finding methods. So this is one where I created this concept of the page type equals product details page or PDV, and then they ended up getting to the cart page. Well, I can see, cool, this is good news. The user went from product details to the cart. That's good news. Now, I also want to see, well, what was the product finding method for those users? And so this is inclusive of everyone. So that's one way to look at my data. If I want to filter, so only those users, you can see the little tiny icon here that says it happened before my sequence. Now I can say, I want to see what happened before the user got to the product details page. So that'll be a little more specific. What was the product finding method for those users, most likely that got to that product details? So that's another way to look at our data. And then finally, just for the use, we also have the icon for after my sequence occurs. So page content contains cart, and maybe instead of that, we could switch the dimension for that one over to page, and we'll see, look at that. Oh, it makes so much more sense. We've got all these different cart pages, if we're to sort by that are being accessed after this sequence occurs. So several different ways to interact with your data there. Let's see, I'm trying to take a look at my notes and see if there's anything I missed. The one item, going back to calculated metrics, is I didn't actually create a calculated metric that has, oh, that's a segment, that has a segment in it. And that's something super, super cool too. So maybe we want to see our page views, and then we can say, you know what, we only care about mobile page views. So we've got this mobile device type equals mobile phone, or it equals tablet, and so I can drag that on in, and now I've got my mobile phone tablet page views metric. Mobile phone or tablet page views. Really, really powerful way to apply segmentation to your page views. Now again, I can drag in visits here as well. Keep in mind that where you drop that is very important. You know, if I drag it above it, that's gonna apply it differently. And then very similarly, if I remove my segment, and if I were to drag my segment below it, then that pulls in a different style of where my segment actually applies. So lots of different capabilities here. The one thing to take note is if there's a segment that you haven't yet created, so you look in here and you say, oh, okay, I've got all these different segments, but that's not what I want from my calculated metric. We do give you the ability to create a segment right in the dialog. It'll pull in the segment builder and allow you to do that as well. So little time saver there. Rather than going back out, going to create new segment, create new metric, and head back on in. So with that, we've got 7 minutes on the button. And so I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen here briefly, or I'm actually going to hit pause so that I can take a look and see if there's any questions that we haven't been able to answer within the Q&A pod. So let's see. Thomas, I'm not sure if you've got any questions that you want to share over to me, or if there's anything that we have. Folks on the participant side of things, I know I went through things fast, but definitely do please ask some questions if you've got any. So let's see. So I've got one here. Some segments. Yep. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say there haven't been any questions yet, but I can see there's one or two, Jim, rolling in now. So yeah, please just go ahead and address.
Yeah. So let's see. So this one was that some segments are only supported in Data Warehouse or only supported in Workspace. And so let me actually show you where that actually exists within the segmentation builder. And so when we head on into components, new segments, you'll see this ability for product compatibility. And so the one thing to take note of is you don't actually see analysis workspace here, and that's because any segment that you create within your segment builder, so if we say, let's say page views is greater than 500, then you can see maybe the product compatibility is going to adjust, and that didn't actually do anything. Maybe we say, how about, let's see, then page views equals 12. Just trying to find a way that, there we go. So now we can see Data Warehouse is no longer compatible within my segment. And so that's something that we're working on, and is certainly something that we want to make sure segments are available wherever you need them. But of course, you know, there are some limitations based on how we're processing data behind the scenes, and so that's why we're proactively informing you, hey, this product or this segment that you're creating may not be available in other tools. You can click this Learn More to better understand the compatibility around where there are some limitations. And it really is, the majority of limitations are tied to Data Warehouse just because of the level of granularity that the Data Warehouse set of data is defined. So good question there. I'll hit pause for another second here. Head back on over into my questions. And so yeah, so we're talking about content velocity was a good question from Nicholas. And so that's one that I've brought up on a couple of different webinars here, so many so that I've actually tweeted this and made it pinned, actually, because we're getting so many good questions on it. I want to make sure that everyone has access to it. And so feel free to head on over to Twitter and take a look at it. So basically the concept is, here's the definition, and then what the different goals of it. The goal for content velocity is to show on average how many page views, including the originating one, are driven by the page that you are analyzing. It's extremely valuable when analyzing lots of dimensions, but the default is to break it down by page, but internal, external campaign, page type, etc., and some other good questions, some good conversation going on in here as well. So hopefully that's a good explanation there. Definitely don't hesitate to check it out and ask any additional questions there on Twitter as well. Let's see, next question we have is, how is a 20th percentile visit actually defined? So that what that means is it's the, if you think about, let's say in terms of all of my visitors, the 20%, the number of visits that I'm having trouble explaining this properly, the top 80% of the visits. So it's basically saying, if we were to take a look at the total number of visits for my dimension and find the 20th, let's see, the total, sorry, I'm having a lot of trouble explaining this, the total sum of them, and basically divide it by 20, then you're going to find the 20th percentile number. And then what I was showing earlier around greater than is the items or the pages that were above that 20th percent. Good question. Let's see. General question, are you active in sports analytics with Adobe Analytics? Just curious because you mentioned the Moneyball concept in the beginning. Andreas, I am not nearly as involved in them as Ben Gaines. That dude is all about the sports analytics, but I certainly am a fan, so I'll leave it there. Let's see. Do you use your stack segment approach also to analyze user journeys instead of doing the flow diagram? Yeah, I think that they're both very worthwhile ways of analyzing user journeys, is stack segments and flows. But I think it depends on what the question is that you're trying to answer. And with that, we're just running out of time. So with the last two questions that I didn't get to, I'm going to follow up over email so that we can make sure we get every single question answered. Thomas, feel free to take it away from here.
Thank you, Eric. And thanks again to all of you taking the time to join the session today. As mentioned earlier, a link to the live recording will be sent to everyone who registered for today's session. The next session for Analytics Thursday will happen on August 3rd. We will cover data science, anomaly detection, contribution analysis, and segment compare.